Hello everyone and welcome back to my modding tutorial. So today I have two topics that I want to just talk about a bit. We're not actually going to do any coding today. Just consider it a little bit of a breather. There are a couple things that I think we should discuss before we continue on. So one thing that I would like to cover is IDs and metadata. And then I'd like to talk a bit about textures. So, as many people may already know, every block and item in Minecraft has an ID number associated with it, and if you look up at the top in Layla, on the second line, it is showing me the block ID of what I'm looking at, and after the colon is the metadata. And you'll notice a lot of things in vanilla Minecraft, they have a meta value of 0, and metadata can be used for a variety of different things. One example is if you have, say, a farm with a bunch of wheat planted on it, the wheat crops use metadata to determine how mature they are. Another use is to have multiple blocks in one block ID, as we can see with the oak, spruce, birch, and junglewood logs here. We've got 4 different blocks, kind of. Technically, we've got 12 different blocks here, each with their own unique metadata. So we've got oak wood, which is 0, spruce, which is 1, birch, which is 2, and jungle, which is 3. Then we've got the oak wood with an, I believe that's an east-west facing, yeah, which is metadata 4. Then the spruce wood with the east-west facing is metadata 5, and so on down the line. And I do something very similar in Silence Gems. If you were to take a look at this mod, you'll notice that, for example, all these gemstone ores, these are the same ID. All the gemstone blocks are the same ID, and so on. Now, we are a bit limited with block and item IDs. The two numbers combined use a total of 16 bits, 12 bits for the block ID, and 4 bits for the metadata. That means that block IDs are limited to a range of 0 to 4095 inclusive, so there are 4096 block IDs available, which is a pretty good number, but it's significantly less than the available item IDs. And the 4 bits for metadata means that you're limited to a total of 16 possible values in the range of 0 to 15 inclusive. So that's why, for example, I have 2 different IDs for bricks and gems, because there's 12 different variations, so I have to split those up. So in the next video, I would like to cover how to make I guess you would call it a meta block, such as what I'm doing here, where I'm compressing all these different blocks, like literally dozens of blocks, into just a handful of IDs. Which is not really necessary, but it just makes things so much nicer, and again, we're limited to a little over 4,000 block IDs, which is a lot, but it'd be better to use them sparingly, if possible, just in case. As for items, we're significantly less limited. I'm having a bit of trouble finding exactly what it is. I've never tested it myself, but I think the maximum item ID is roughly 2 to the 15th power, so you have about 32,000 item IDs, a bit more than that. And for item metadata, they have a signed 16-bit integer, or a short, so they can range from negative 32,000 to positive 32,000, approximately. So we have a lot more room to work with items than we do with blocks. And similar to with blocks, you can compress a large number of items into a single ID. So all the gems here, they follow pretty much the same pattern as the blocks, except when you go to the supercharged gems, those are also the same ID, and you will see they have metadata that is greater than what you can have with blocks. Okay, and another example of an item using metadata in Silenced Gems is the Torch Bandolier, which increments its damage value as it uses up the torches that it has. So let me go ahead and switch to survival mode here. And you can see this is full. It has no damage value. That means no metadata. You can use the two terms interchangeably, but if I place a torch, it has 1 damage on it now. Place another, it has 2, and so on. And tools do something very similar where their damage value ticks up as you use them until you get to the point where they have no durability left and they break. Because of this, whenever you're making tools, you will need to have a separate ID for every tool. As we can see here, just each one of these tools uses a separate ID. I mean, technically, you could have different kinds of tools with the same ID, but you would need to start messing around with NBT data in order to accomplish that, which is what Tinker's Construct does, for example. Okay, so I think I've covered everything about metadata here. Again, next episode we'll probably go into making a meta block, which will have several different blocks, similar blocks, in the same item. Okay, so now I would like to talk a little bit about textures. So, vanilla Minecraft, for I believe all of its blocks and items, uses 16 by 16 pixel textures. But I can't remember which version of Minecraft they started it in, but you can actually use different size textures now without having to install any mods. So, for example, most of the textures in Silenced Gems are actually 32 by 32. There is actually a little bit of variation. The texture for the debug item is 64 by 64. The dies are 16 by 16, and some of these temporary armor textures are too. I'm still working on those. But otherwise, I've mostly just done 32 by 32 here. And this mod has a lot of textures in it. So what sizes can you use? I'm not clear on that. I've seen some sources that say it has to be a multiple of 16. Personally, I would say use a power of 2. So 16, 32, 64, 128. Personally, I would say try to stick to 64 by 64 or less, because bigger textures mean longer load times for the users, which, I mean, a heavily modded Minecraft client already takes several minutes to launch, even on a good computer. So don't make your textures too big. I like the 32 by 32. That gives you a pretty good amount of detail without actually being too heavy on the memory usage. The texture files also need to be a PNG with transparency. So I'm not really sure what the standard with game development is now. I know in the past, when I was first starting out, we used like fuchsia for transparency, but here we need PNGs with transparency. And you're not going to be creating textures in MS Paint. As far as I know, you cannot do transparency in MS Paint. Grab something like paint.net. It's totally free. It loads up insanely fast. It's not very... It doesn't have a lot of crazy features to it, but it does a pretty good job for just working with simple textures like this. I also use GIMP sometimes because it has some more advanced features like scripting, things like that, so I can automate production of textures. Otherwise, I strongly recommend paint.net. It's a great program. It does its job very well. It's what I use most of the time for making textures. So some other tips for making textures. If you're not particularly creative, you could just grab a texture from vanilla and recolor it, for example. So let me see if I can find something in here that's like gray. Something like that. I've got too many colorful textures in here. Yeah, let's use Chaos Coal. Okay, so say for example you're wanting to make an ingot and you load up the vanilla ingot class. I know that's not what I have open, but work with me here. So one thing that's good to do is a hue and saturation, which is under the adjustments menu in paint.net. That doesn't really work very well if your texture is not already very colorful. You can see this has a little bit of color because it is changing. But say it is a grayscale image, one thing you can do is you can go to Adjustments, Cyanotype, and that'll make it kind of blue, and then you'll be able to adjust its color a lot more easily. It's still kind of pale, but we could bump up the saturation to fix that, maybe turn down the lightness, give it a bit more color, and just kind of play with it. Some of these colors don't look very good, but you could see just using this hue and saturation tool is very useful for creating variants of existing textures, like different color ingots. Or say you wanted to make like a red diamond, you could do that very easily without actually having to click on the image at all. So those are some basic tips for making things like textures. We covered metadata. I believe that's all I wanted to cover for this episode, so next time we'll do the meta block, hopefully. As always, thank you for watching this video. If you haven't already subscribed, don't forget that's an option if you want to. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.